to Zero to Hero, Become an AI ProPilot mentorship. We are thrilled to have you on board as we embark on this exciting 8-week journey to unlock the true potential of AI. Throughout this program, you will gain hands-on experience and in-depth knowledge integrating Microsoft Copilots seamlessly into your workflow to boost work quality and efficiency. By the end of this mentorship, you will be equipped with cutting-edge AI tools to boost your productivity and innovation. We are excited to see how you use these tools to transform your daily work, and we are excited to prepare you for the future, a future with AI. Join us. Already, this is lesson 7, and for many, 7 is a lucky number. We are very lucky for having Scott Duro here with us today. There is a lot of familiar faces in the call this time around, looking for some pouring out of pro development wisdom from Scott. So from the get-go, I want to not only welcome our speaker, but thank him for donating his time and expertise to us within the Zero to Hero program. It's an honor, my friend, to have you here today. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Victor. Thank you for that warm welcome, and thank you everyone for joining, those joining live, and if you're watching the recording as well, so welcome. It's a really great privilege to be here and talk to you. My name is Scott Duro, and I'm a cloud developer advocate with Microsoft. And before that, I was an Microsoft MVP 10 times. So I've had a lot of, the privilege to grow up with the Power Platform. But I'm a pro dev really at heart. I mean, that's where I came from. So I came from, I was doing embedded C++ in industrial control systems. Then I moved on to ERP. And then I moved into kind of designing business websites, business systems, and moved on to the full Microsoft stack, ASP.NET, and eventually, and then all of the like SharePoint Server and Commerce Server and things like that. And so I was really brought into the whole low code world as a way of really just expediting, making it easier to build the things that we've been building. And I saw the early days of, it was Microsoft CRM actually back then. And it was very alluring because it did so many of the things that we had to do by hand over and over again. You know, it was the sort of the boilerplate code that you had to write, the tedious stuff. It was very easy to just create tables and relationships and forms over that and views on that and searching and dashboards, all those things that you just had to have in every single business system. When it was just lightning fast, you just did it through the user interface and using metadata. So my beginnings with Power Platform, and of course that grew up into Dataverse and all of the other different products that we know and love today, was always about making it more efficient, making the developer experience more efficient, making the developer experience less tedious. And so today, what I'm going to talk to you about is really the next evolution of that. So if low code was like the first step on making a developer's life easier and more fun, then really AI and specifically Copilot in the developer experience is that next generation. So I'll put my contact details on at the end as well, so you can take a look at them. But we're going to look at something called GitHub Copilot. And so for those of you who have not used it, I'll show you what it does and how you can use it. But today I'm it's always a bit risky using AI in demos, but we're gonna have a bit of fun, right? And I'm just going to show you how I use GitHub Copilot to work on pro code on C# and TypeScript. But also I'm going to show you how I use it in a low code way as well to build various different solutions using Power Platform. And then we're going to look at actually extending Copilot Studio agents using ProCode with the help of GitHub Copilot. So we'll kind of apply it a little bit there. So there's a lot to get through, and yeah, I think we'll just see how it works, right? Because it's an iterative process. AI is non-deterministic, and I'm sure anybody who's used ChatGPT or Copilot knows that you write something in there, a prompt, and then you'll constantly get different answers. You know, it's never going to give you the same thing twice. So none of these demos can be really rehearsed because who knows what's going to happen. So yes, we'll have a bit of fun and just you kind of get into the developer cycle that I do on a regular day basis. But yeah, AI is this next frontier in software development. You know, we started off with low code, and we're now moving into making things look so much more efficient. And GitHub Copilot is actually having an effect on actually that experience. So when I'm writing code, it's so much more enjoyable. It's more productive. Obviously, I can do things faster. But I think for me, the thing that it's had is it's made it more enjoyable to do. I want to use Copilot to actually write code because I can stay in the zone more, right? There's less mental effort on things that I'm doing over and over and over again, which is what low code did for us. But now it's just taking it to that next level. And so it's I'm allowing myself to sort of focus on actually what I'm designing and what I'm actually creating, and it's more satisfying, and I'm staying in the flow all of the time because I'm not getting distracted with having to go out and binging and googling and finding out things and looking at samples. I can just do it right there from where I'm actually developing. But a lot of the time, people, you know, used to worry about low code. You know, is low code going to replace the need for us developers to actually do any work and build software? But of course, we all know that that was absolutely not the case. We've seen how low code has not replaced developers. Low code has done quite the opposite. It's just made us more productive and allowing us to focus more. So, and that's exactly the same way for GitHub Copilot and Copilot in Power Platform as well. It's not replacing us, it's just allowing us to have these superpowers and making us so much better at what we do. So less time on all those repetitive things and going out and binging and Googling and looking at samples and just working out where vulnerabilities are and fixing bugs and just getting bogged down with all that kind of stuff. Just so much less time on that and more time on the really high value business stuff like designing stuff or brainstorming and collaborating and iterating across like multiple different ways of doing things and planning. And Victor and I were just discussing earlier how like dreaming out loud. I think, Victor, that was the phrase that you used, which I love. I love dreaming out loud. And that's kind of what it allows us to do in GitHub Copilot, in Copilot in general. It allows us to vocalize our dreams, and then GitHub can then help us actually make those dreams reality. So it as you can guess, I'm a big fan. So what we're going to do is going to go through and I'm going to show how I actually use GitHub Copilot to build software for Power Platform. And I'm going to go through, here's a list of tips, and I could just go through each of these and just, you know, talk about them and tell you in theory how they work. But they're all fairly, I think, based on the sessions we've had so far about, you know, how to use Copilot to do various different tasks, not non-pro code tasks, but they're the same things that apply, right? So how you use an LLM, how you use GPT-4o, how you interact with it is equally the same in when you're writing code as if you're writing prose to post on LinkedIn or something like that. So we're going to look at actually how each of these tips applies in practice. So, as an example on actually how I can show you how I would use Copilot when I'm doing pro development, we're going to use an example here. And this is a sample that in advocacy we've built, which is built based on a pure pro code solution called Contosa Real Estate. But actually what we've done is we've then taken that and augmented it with Power Platform to show how you can use Power Platform alongside pro code. Because I think this is really always the most important thing to remember is that when we're talking about low code, when we're talking about Power Platform, we are not talking about an either or. We are not saying choose Power Platform or choose low code. absolutely not the case. It's about augmenting and extending and combining the two to actually use pro code to make low code even more powerful. And so it's about trying to combine the two. And actually, GitHub Copilot, a lot of the time, people obviously you'll see demos of GitHub Copilot in Visual Studio and VS Code and all these IDEs that developers are using. It's in Azure as well. It's in GitHub. And you'll see a lot of demos of writing Python code or writing Ruby or, a lot of things that are very, very pure pro dev. Well, actually, GitHub Copilot understands Power Platform in many, many places because it's trained on this huge body of code that's in the public domain in GitHub. So it's taken all of this code into its model, and so therefore it can now reason over what you're asking it to do. And if you give it the prompts to ask it and you give it existing information from your code base already, it can then actually work very, very well in creating solutions for Power Platform. So this is an AKA short link for the Contosa Real Estate, the GitHub. And so this is actually here. So this is the GitHub repo that we're going to use. And if I go over and just quickly show you what it is, it's a portal based on Power Pages, which also has a model-driven app and a Canvas app behind the scenes. It also has Copilot Studio, so it has an agent that allows you to ask questions about the website. And you can then go in and you can search for listings, and you can then book those listings, and you can search based on, if it's got parking or pool and things like that, and then you can view the listing and you can look at the images, and then you can select dates, and then there's a whole kind of checkout process. So it's also built over a lot of security best practices as well. So it's using a variety of different techniques, which you can go in and see inside the repo. So imagine you were to download this repo, and you are going to look at this and say, right, okay, well, what does it actually do? Now, there is a lot of READMEs in there. And so you can, excuse me, my dog wanted to come in and join us. So there is a lot of information in there, a lot of READMEs that you can read, and you can browse how to set up the system. But say, for example, you're working on a system that has no README, okay? Or maybe you wanted to create a README. Well, we can use Copilot inside Visual Studio or VS Code to help us understand existing code. And this is huge, especially actually, even if it does have a README, it allows us to summarize it. So this is what Copilot looks like inside VS Code. So you can see here, we've got this panel on the right hand, and there's this little Copilot icon here at the top, which allows us to open this right hand side panel. And the first and most important thing to understand is that you have got a lot of things at your disposal to create context, okay? So context is everything when it comes to using AI and LLMs against your pro code. So I've just done a /help command, and / is one of those ways of actually interacting with Copilot to provide it with additional information on what you're trying to achieve. But then you've also got these agents, these agents. And actually, interestingly, Copilot Studio is talking about agents now. It was renamed to have agents. Now, GitHub Copilot has had agents for a very long time. So it's actually bringing the two into alignment. And GitHub Copilot was actually the first Copilot. This has been around for a very, very long time. So it's a very mature system. So we can see that we can mention various different agents. So I can ask, like VS Code, I could just ask very simple information. Like if I say VS Code, I don't know, how do I change the font size? It's going to give us information on actually how to interact with VS Code. So it's giving us sort of like a way of actually learning about how to use the IDE. And I think as much as being able to actually write code, and explain code, I think Copilot is also a huge about learnings tool, because once you put in Copilot into VS Code, so as I mentioned before, it allows you to stay inside your IDE, and you can actually ask it questions about how to do things, and it will give you information on that, and so it'll teach you how to do things, new techniques that maybe you don't know about. And also you can see here, it gives you great little buttons to say, actually, it can, okay, show me how to do that in VS Code. So it's very, very sophisticated. But say, for example, I've opened up this VS Code project, and I say, well, workspace, and that what the workspace agent allows us to do is it tells that the context of of Copilot to say, use all of the files in my current open workspace and tell me about those. So I'm going to say, I'm going to ask this, okay, what technologies and languages are used and why? Okay, so I'm starting to explore my code. I'm not going into the code first, and you can see what it's doing here is it's said, right, I'm going to go and grab some existing readmes. So there's some readmes here, or if there was no readmes, it will go and grab code and start to examine that code. And what you can see here is that it's actually giving us a description of what's going on. So it's saying we're using TypeScript and JavaScript, we're using React, Azure Functions. It's saying we're using Dataverse as well. And look, we're using Stripe for payment checkouts, Webpack for bundling all of our JavaScript. And so now what you can do is you can then start to say, you can ask it more questions. So Workspace. How is Webpack used and where? So you can start to drill down, and then eventually it's actually going to give us links into those files. So you can see, look, there's the portal UI, and it's giving. I can click on that, and it's actually opening that in the IDE and giving us. Now, when you open up a file inside the IDE, what that does is that actually provides the Copilot with even more context, right? So the files that you have open inside VS Code actually then are elevated inside their importance. So what it means is that when I ask a question about this particular file, it will allow us to explain it. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is, let's say we wanted to maybe we didn't have a documentation, right? So maybe we had no README. Well, what we can do is we can actually say, I can actually ask it to, so Workspace, if I come down here and say, let's say Workspace, document the database structure using the mermaid ERD diagrams. Okay, so a mermaid is great. It's like, it's a way of creating markup, okay, which then can be rendered inside a browser or inside a GitHub README. And so I'm going to go over to a browser here, and I'm going to open up Mermaid Live like this. And what this is like a way of visualizing our particular diagram. So you can see here I've got a diagram that shows like a branching strategy. Okay, so, but I'm going to just quickly go back over to my real estate application, and let's close that one down. Let's just open this one and see what it's come up with. Okay, so it's now given us this ERD diagram, and here is the listings, the listing fee, listing image. So it's giving us all of these table structures. It's just gathered that from a combination of code and also a combination of readmes. So it's gathered all the information in the workspace. And look, now suddenly you can see that it's actually creating an ERD. Now, and actually this even works from if you have extracted your solution, your Dataverse solution, into code using pack CLI, the command line interface, it will actually interpret all of those files that solution XML creates, and it will allow you to create an ERD from it, which is pretty awesome. Now, what I'll do later on is I'll show you how you can do the reverse. So you can use Copilot to then go and create tables inside Dataverse. But we can use it also to do all sorts of other things, like to ask it to create like an architectural diagram. Okay, so let's go over and let's say let's do workspace, create a architectural diagram for our solution. So let's just wait for it to paste in there, or maybe, for example, a sequence diagram. That's another really cool thing, because a sequence diagram, if you wanted to understand the flow through a system, it's looking like it may have. Oh no, it's going to come back. There we go. Let's open up VS Code again, and just wait. For some reason, it didn't like that particular query. Let's just open VS Code. So one of the complexities with a new project is actually understanding the flow through a particular part of the software. And sequence diagrams are fantastic for understanding the structure of how things are called in your system. So if I open up that repo again, and I'm going to, there we go. So it's brought me back into the same place. I'm going to use the same thing. So I'm going to use workspace, and I'm going to say create a sequence diagram for. Sometimes I'm a very good typer, and when people are watching especially, but it'll actually, it's quite forgiving. I generally don't bother about what I type, but what it will do here is actually it will go and search for all of the different files in the system, but what it will also do is you can actually then give it more information about what you're trying to do. So if I were to open up a particular part of the system, maybe open up one of the like if I open up if I go into this portal React UI and I go into the components and I opened up a checkout page here, what that would allow us to do is to ask a question about a particular part of it. Now, it seems to not be liking, of course, because I'm trying to demo it, everything stops working. So if I close that and open this again and start a new session, it's just waiting. I don't know what it's doing now. It says it's initializing the various different parts of the system. But if we were to open up a particular file, what I can also do is I can ask it to document that file, and I can even ask it to add in comments. And that's another thing that I find myself doing a lot, is like, okay, I write the code first, and then I go and use it to actually add the comments. Now, this seems a little bit strange that you are writing comments for something, and then using Copilot to summarize those comments. It's like that cartoon, you send an email using Copilot, and then somebody uses Copilot to create a reply and summarize it. So AI is being in the middle. But here we go. It's actually created me a sequence diagram, so I can copy that. And I go over into my Mermaid visualizer, and then there we go. It's now created a sequence diagram. So you can see here the user is initializing the checkout, as creating a portal, creating a checkout session using the payment API, which then calls Stripe, and then returns the URL, completes the payment. There's a webhook involved as well, and then it tells the user that it's the reservation is confirmed. So immediately, just by writing that code or just by inheriting that code, I can actually create some pretty awesome documentation for it. So let's go on and actually use it to write some code, okay? Because obviously writing code is the thing that we do a lot of. So I'm going to open up part of this system, which is a model-driven app. So if I go into the core over here, there are many different. There's actually 3 different solutions. There's a core, there's a control, PCF controls, and there's a portal solution. There's also an Azure API, which is using Bicep to deploy as well, and it's all actually using GitHub workflows to deploy it as well. But I'm going to go into this client hooks, which is actually a TypeScript project. So if I open up a terminal inside the context of that TypeScript project, what I can do is I can actually set this running. So if I go into my packages.json, I can see I've got a command here called watch. So if I say npm run watch, what that's going to do is it's going to compile that particular TypeScript project, and it's going to start watching for changes. Now, I could have asked GitHub how to do this, because again, it will actually look at this particular JSON package JSON. And so if I just asked GitHub, okay, how do I actually start this in watch mode, it would actually be able to detect this as well. And it sometimes just feels like magic. But let's say if I went over into my forms, I've got a form piece of TypeScript here, which at the moment does something fairly basic. It shows a particular field. In this case, it's showing the features field based on the parking field based on if I've selected features. So let's take a look at actually what that looks like inside the model-driven app. So if I go into listings here, let's open up one of these records here. So this is a model-driven app that's for managing the listings in the portal. So you can see here we've got the images, and I have got a feature here, a set of features that I can select. And say if I put in parking here, then it actually shows me the total number of parking spaces field. So that's actually, you can see there it's toggling it on and off. So that's that kind of piece of functionality. Now, maybe I wanted to have a piece of functionality here that actually is going to validate an address. So it was like, a case of saying, when I enter an address of the apartment, maybe it wants to use the Azure Maps functionality. So I could actually, the way I can do this, I can write in a little comment here. And I can just say, right, okay, here is, I'm saying function to validate the Contoso listings attributes Contoso address. So I'm giving it context. I'm saying this is the attribute that I want to take the address from. And I'm also saying using Azure Maps, okay? Because again, it's very important to give your comments some structure and some information. Now you could just say, well, write me a function to validate the address. But what it's going to do is it's going to go and take its best guess, and it might get it right and it might get it wrong. But actually in your comments, if you can give it a little bit more specific information, it's a lot more powerful. So if I press return on here, what that does is that will then go and off to GitHub Copilot, and you can see here that it's actually giving me a function. It's actually just writing it for me. Now, I can accept that, but I can also look at alternatives, right? So I can say, here you can see there's a slightly different way of doing this. So it's accepting the context, and then it's saying if the address is there, it's going in and validating that. I don't know what this one's going to be. Oh, this one's interesting. The third one is always usually a bit of a curveball. But what it's doing is it's setting a notification here. So I'm just going to accept that. Okay. Now I can type enter as well. That will also accept it as well. But that, sometimes you get sort of little errors in here, so, okay, well, what's going on here? It's like set notification. Well, why is that? And this gives you the ability, if you press Control dot, you can actually say, explain this or fix it. And what it's going to do is it's going to open up the inline chat, and it actually gives us a piece of information. It actually looks at, doesn't just go off to Copilot, it's actually looking at our code and looking at the types of our code. And there it's saying that you need to provide a unique ID as the second argument. And so I can actually accept that. Now, I didn't plan this, right? It's just like, this is just the way in which it's just giving it. Last time I did it, it got it right first time. So it's a bit random. But you can also see I can fix a prettier problem there. That's just part of the now, one other thing here is it's saying validate address. That doesn't exist. Okay, so it's a kind of it's creating me part of the solution. Now I could just say here validate function to validate the address. See, it's even just creating me the comment, immediately. And if I press return, it will actually give me a validate address. Now, notice this validate address is kind of like empty. Okay, so it's just giving me a little. It's stubbing it out, and so we'll look at that in a minute. But we're saying here that it's using address, so I'm going to just log the address, and see. Did you see there? It gave me a prompt, and I didn't even need to type in it. It knew that I wanted to actually log the address. So let's just actually look at if this is what this is like inside the browser. So I'm going to start debugging this. So I'm going to use a program called Fiddler to redirect any requests to that particular file from my from the browser to my local machine. Okay, so I'm using something called autoresponders. And so here is my form here, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a empty cache and hard reload, and so that will then reload that page with that new bit of script because it's pointing at my local machine. And so we can actually test this. So we can actually just say, okay, right, let's enter in an address here. Say this is in California, and okay, right, so it didn't actually validate that. So what we can do is we can say open up. Now what's this called? What's this what is this particular? Okay, this is called this is called listing form.typescript. Okay, so let's go and have a look at and this is where you actually see me doing things live and trying these things out. So let's go and open up listing form.typescript and see what's in there. Okay, so at the moment, you can see here it's returning true. So that means that the check is always going to be true. So if I go back and put in some breakpoints here, let's just check that this stuff is working. But what you're going to notice is that it's not actually going to be calling it. So US. So it's not working, right? Because this is not actually being called. And the reason being is that what it hasn't done is it hasn't worked out that it needs to add in a registration for the on change. So what I show you here is a slightly different way of editing, because up until now I've been doing inline editing, okay? And inline editing is great where you're typing, but there's this different mode, and this mode is called edits mode, okay? And what edits mode does is it's kind of like your companion units, like your ally, your co-worker, your pair programmer, whatever, and it allows you to kind of talk about this code. So it's like dreaming out loud, like Victor said. So I'm going to say, like, okay, well, add in a registration for the on change that calls the address on change function. So, and what this does is this is now actually not only just taking a look at our code, but it's also going to allow us, it's actually going to apply the edits to the entire file for us and show us what it's done. And can you notice, there we go, it's now added in. You can highlight it in green, and it gives us a little option to undo it. It says, look, okay, we're going to need to register this attribute as on change, and we're calling this particular function. So if I accept that, we'll see that this code is then recompiled because I will need to save it. And if we go back over to our form here and refresh this, let's have a look at what's going on here. And now what it's going to do, let's have a look at this, and let's just change this. This now should break into our on change. So there we go, our on changes. And it's gone into the validate address, but of course it's going to return true. So let's just go and actually add in let's return false. And then just check that will actually give us the little message. But of course, sometimes you want to be able to actually test this stuff without actually putting it in the browser. And that's where unit tests come in. So I'll show you how it can help with that. But if I change that, now what we're doing is it's called there, and there we go. You can see here that it's giving us that little message, invalid address, and so it's all working. But if I wanted to say, okay, we'll actually now add in a call to Azure Maps to validate, like this. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to go off and work out, based on existing code out there, like how do you call Azure Maps? And what that will mean it will do is it will go and look at other people's code on how they've called it. And it's going to go and bring in the rest of the project, any other files it needs. And as you can see here, there we go. It's now saying it's going and calling Azure Maps. And it's doing awaiting the response, and it's saying if there's more than one result, then accept true. So I'm going to accept that. Just going to do a little reformat of that. And so it's saying here we can replace that by a simplification. So there we go. I've done it. Now, notice I'm actually exposing, it says your Azure Maps key. So this is where we can actually start to have a conversation about it, right? So we can say, is it secure to have the Azure Maps key on the browser client? So it actually can start to ask questions about our code, and this is what it means. It's like you bouncing ideas off a colleague almost. And you're saying, no, it's not secure to have the Azure Maps key on the browser client. It can lead to unauthorized use. So, and it's giving us some suggestions like, okay, create a server-side endpoint, move the Azure Maps key to the server-side code, right? So I can say, okay, well, let me do that. And, okay, so create what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to copy a little thing here. That I've already got here, a prompt, just to make it a little bit quicker. And so what I'm saying here is creating a custom API plugin in the Contoso Real Estate Business Logic project that calls the Azure Maps API using a key stored in a Dataverse environment variable. So I've started to be very, very specific now. And of course, I could get a lot of this by talking to Copilot. I could say, well, how do I do this? And then it will say, well, you could use a custom API, and you can actually have this conversation. But I've kind of gone straight to it. And I'm also saying update the client-side code to call the custom API. So a lot of information there. Sometimes it's easier to do it in iterations, in smaller chunks. But what we can do now is actually go in and just see the edits that it is doing. And it will go and create me all of those edits necessary. It will go and work out that there's a custom API there. So you can say it's bringing in, okay, there it's bringing in the validate address plugin. So it's creating me a plugin. It's updating the listing form. So it's now working not only across my JavaScript, but it's actually now working in my plugin code as well, my C# server-side code, which is like pretty remarkable. I think and it is a real time type saver. And then it gives us there we go. So if I can accept all of those, it's saying that there we go. It's calling the web API with a particular validated address, and I can accept that. And then go and test that. And I can even use it to say and go and create tests. So I can say create unit tests. Unit test for the client side code. So, and on it will then go and create that test for us, and then we can actually run it inside our existing test framework in the browser, inside VS Code. So it's pretty spectacular, and it understands all sorts of other things. So, for example, I went into my let's go into Portal, and I go into my Portal React UI, and I go into my components here, and if I go into my listings component here, which is written in React, what I can do now is I can let's just have a little bit of fun, right? So I could just say, I'm going to start a new conversation here, and it says that the existing context is listings, so we've got to open, and I'm going to just say add confetti effect when the search button, or actually when a feature is changed, like that. So it's going to look at my code and look at the rest, and it's going to look at my project and how it's done, and it's going to say, right, okay, it's going to go and work out when the features change event is happening, or it'll add a new event if it's not there. And so let's have a look at the changes it's made. So there we go. It's added in a confetti thing there, and it's actually using. So let's accept that like that. And if I go into my portal React URI and I say open integrate, and I say let's go and look at our pause our packages and find out the command to run. So which is going to be dev. So I'm going to say npm run dev like that. And so that will then compile and start watching my my new bit of code. And so let's go into the browser while it does that and open up my my listings. Let's move that there. Go to my listings page here and go to my my search page. So let's go back to a previous page. And let's go to listings like that. And so now what if it's actually loaded, so I don't know if it'll actually have loaded yet because it hasn't compiled it. So we'll wait for it to, so there we go. It's running and it's still building it. So let's just wait for it to finish building like this. And with any luck, our new file should be ready. And because I'm using Fiddler as well as I'm redirecting my, when it loads that client-side file, it will load it from my local disk rather than the server. But what it does that actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over and show what it looks like in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so in Visual Studio rather than VS Code, what I've got here is I've actually got a Spotify piece of code here. So inside, I've actually created a extension for Copilot, and I created a custom connector, right? So I used to create a custom connector for the Spotify connector. So if I go and say, let's ask it for to find out some albums from a particular band. So I'm going to ask, because I'm going to ACDC, the Arctic Developer Challenge, Arctic Cloud Developer Challenge, it stands for. That's obviously a band as well. So I'm going to ask my Copilot about that. And I'm asking it to use a particular agent that I've created. And so what this will do is it will give me a list of, okay, so it didn't actually work. So let's just check that that is turned on. There we go. I need to turn it on. It would help, wouldn't it? Let's ask it again and see what happens this time. So we can actually extend Copilot using our custom connectors in Power Platform. Let's start a new chat. Well, and it's always unpredictable when we're using Copilot. But sometimes when we want to do things with a custom connector, maybe there isn't exactly the right kind of connector available, or maybe there isn't a web service that has exactly the same format. So what we can do is we can actually create custom services. Of course, it's not going to play at all. So let's go to a different approach. I actually have this inside a here we go. I've got this inside a different agent here. So let's just ask the same thing. So search for albums by AC/DC. So this is doing the same thing. This is calling a custom connector in exactly the same way as it would be doing through our M365 Biz Chat there. And so you can see there it's actually specified AC/DC as the input, the album, and there we go. We've got all the albums displayed there. But say, for example, I didn't have the ability to call, because this is a custom connector that calls directly to the Spotify client. Sometimes you want to be able to extend Copilot Studio, but I need to create a custom web service and a custom connector that calls my custom code. Well, I can use Copilot to do the same kind of thing. So I can just say, I can ask it to write the code here. So I can just say, right, write code to call Spotify and search for the artist and return a list of albums. And because it knows about all that code that's in the public domain, it actually gives us the here we go. We've got a piece of code that it actually gives us to suggestions of how that should work. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to. You can actually do that in line here as well. So I can just say search Spotify for the artist and return the albums like that, and it will actually then give us inline code as well. So I can just tab that and keep on returning and return the search results. So you can, and so here's a piece of code that I've built using Copilot. So if I'm just going to save that, now what I can do is I can now directly I can run this, and then I can then test that inside the browser. But then I can also go and connect to that via a custom connector. And the way I can do that is I can use something called connected services inside Visual Studio here, to actually go and deploy this particular project as a custom connector directly inside my Power Platform environment. Whilst it's doing that, if we go head back over to here, so this is now compiled it, okay? So if I go in and just have do a refresh on my listings page here, so I'll open up my developer tools and I'll do a empty cache and reload. You only need to do that the first time. So remember, before I asked it to create like a confetti effect, and of course this is, it may or may not work. And I think in this particular case, yeah, this is not actually working. So it's yeah, it does seem to me that it's not doing what it should do. But when I tried it, it did actually create a little confetti effect, which was rather spectacular. Maybe I'll post a little picture of what it did last time. But I'll go into Spotify here and okay, I just need to stop this and then run this again. So what this is going to do is it's going to start my service and it's going to connect to something called a dev tunnel. And a dev tunnel is a way of allowing the Power Platform to connect to my local machine when I've created a web service. So I can create a custom connector that connects to a public endpoint. And you can see here it's actually opening up a public endpoint. So it's devtunnels.ms. And this public endpoint actually will connect to my local machine. So I can just say AC/DC and I can execute that. And what this will do is it will now give us a list of, there he goes. And this is actually running the code directly on my machine. So I can actually, if I wanted to, go and create a breakpoint there. But what we can do is we can use connected services to publish this as a custom connector directly into the Power Platform. And I've actually done this already. And if I go over into, if I go back into the browser and open up Copilot Studio and look at, if I go into my particular environment here, so not that, let's go to here and go to our agents. I've created a custom connector test here. And let's take a look at what this looks like when it's deployed it. If I can right click on this and say, open up in Power Apps, it will actually take us directly into the custom connector that it has already created. So if I open up, if I go in here and I edit this particular connector that it's created, and this automatically just did it, it's created it directly there from Visual Studio, and I actually created that entire web service using GitHub Copilot. I didn't know how to call the Spotify client before I used it. I just asked GitHub Copilot. So if I go into to test here, I can say AC/DC, and if I test this operation, there we go. It's hit this breakpoint, right? So you can see it's running on my local machine. And if I continue and go back, you can see there's all the information that it returns. But now what we can do is we can actually add that into our Copilot here, our agent in Copilot Studio. And this is actually now registered just simply as a connector. So I just select the connector. I give it some information about, okay, this searches artists, and I give it, I say, in this particular case, I want to authenticate it using my authentication rather than the user's authentication. But obviously, if your connector had Entra ID authentication, you could also use the end user's authentication. So if I now do this, if I say, ask it, search Spotify for AC/DC, what this will do is it should actually now go, and you can see here, it's now calling my custom connector. It's passing in AC/DC, and this is the output it's given. Now, notice this output is all in JSON, right? Because we saw that in the interaction when we create our service. The service talks in JSON. But the great thing about adding in these custom connectors into Copilot Studio to create your own custom agents is that it will then take that JSON and it'll interpret it. And you can see here it's automatically listed all of the albums with the various different data that comes back from that, and the images even. In fact, I wasn't even expecting the images to come there, so that's pretty cool. But then I can even have further discussions with it. So I can say, which AC/DC album is the oldest, right? And so my service doesn't provide the ability to search by date, okay? It has no. So what we're doing here is we're using the LLM inside of Copilot Studio and the generative AI to actually now start to interact with my connector in a very, very special way. And it's actually now search Spotify for AC/DC, but then it's taken the data and then it's applied some additional reasoning on top of that. And it's saying, look, High Voltage was the original, first, the oldest one, which was in 1976. So it's creating a lot more functionality than just doing it with a call. Otherwise I'd have to go in and create a web service call that allows me to search by date and then configure that. So the LLM, the natural language parsing, is not only taking the data from my query and working out which parameters it needs to pass in, but it's also taking the response that's in JSON and then displaying that in a particular way. So that is me just kind of showing you some things on how I can use Copilot Studio to brainstorm, think about what I want to do, ask it how to do it, if there's any security vulnerabilities, what tools I can use, what techniques, and then it can actually even make those changes to the code and help me. So it's has so many different things at play there, right? We've got converting comments to code, auto suggestions, on creating tests, showing alternatives, very context specific. So it's looking at the workspace, looking at our existing code, allowing us to explain it, debugging, asking for security vulnerabilities, asking it to fix issues. I can even, with the latest pull request add-in for VS Code, it will even allow us to suggest fixes for any issues that are raised against our code. And it can even do things like if you're using PowerShell, and I have to say that I use GitHub Copilot constantly within PowerShell. Like I want to rename a load of files. Okay, I'll just ask GitHub to say, okay, go and rename every file that has, I don't know, Contoso in the name to be Contoso Real Estate, and it will just create me a PowerShell script to do it. So you can be a PowerShell ninja with Copilot Studio, with GitHub Copilot. Now, of course, we've seen things like ChatGPT. We've seen other tools out there. There's loads and loads of different AI tools. So why is GitHub Copilot so special? I think one of the really big focuses of Microsoft is safe, trustworthy, and reliable computing. It really is at the forefront of everything that Microsoft are doing with AI, responsible AI. It's the biggest priority. So that when you're actually putting this stuff in, no one else is going to be going and grabbing your code. You're not giving away any secrets. It is secure. And there's when you're interacting with Azure, there's encryption, and so that you're not going to be having leaking any secrets. There's respecting of intellectual property rights. So any code that you're using inside GitHub Copilot, it's not like someone else is going to go and get that code. Obviously, if you put that into public domain. But even then, you can even use GitHub Copilot to prevent you from using copyrighted code. It will even do checks to make sure that it's not giving you code that is going to contravene any copywriting effects. And so then when you combine that with all the low code tools of Power Platform, you combine this Pro Code and GitHub Copilot and Copilot inside Power Platform as well, which obviously you've seen before, allows you, Victor was showing you a plan designer, allowing you to create tables and structures and apps, and then using the Power Effects Copilot to suggest different edits and things like that. Using Copilot Studio in Pro Code alongside all those low code Copilots, it really just does accelerate your development cycle. And it does actually create so much of a nicer working environment. And I combine the two all the time. It's like, even inside when I'm doing something like using the data workspace inside Power Platform, right? Which is great for creating tables very quickly. What I'll quite often do is I use GitHub Copilot to suggest the tables and the relationships, and then it allows me to then look at it first. And then I ask it to create me a set of prompts, which then I can paste into the data workspace Copilot to actually create those tables and relationships in increments. So it's not like a one-shot thing or a zero-shot prompt. I can actually know what I'm going to be doing because I've already done it inside GitHub Copilot, which is very, very good at designing tables. If you want a demo or even to try it in a workspace of your own, you can go to gh.io/Copilot demo, and it kind of sets you up with a demo. You can kind of try all of these kind of things. So we're at time now. Thank you for joining me on this bit of a geek out session on just playing around with Copilot, showing you all the things I could do. I could spend the whole day with you guys. I really could do, showing you some of the really cool things. But this hopefully is giving you a little bit of a taster, right, into the kind of things and the speed and the agility that you can get using GitHub Copilot and Copilot in Power Platform and combining the two to really start to accelerate your development workflows and just make it more enjoyable. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Victor. Thank you.
Now, this is amazing, Scott. I mean, besides even Copilot, the way you were showing a live hands-on of how you do things, it brings a lot of knowledge there. For me personally, I saw things that I didn't think it was even possible. So thank you for that, for those side lessons. We had a couple of questions on the chat. Sean, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you prefer to maybe combine those two questions into one or speak your questions. If not, I can read it here. Let me know.
I can say them. No problem.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, for putting this on. Scott, what a killer demo. I can't wait to watch this again. So when I was kind of looking at some of the code that you did, I was wondering, the first one was you had Copilot do some of the reasoning for you, Copilot Studio, in terms of figuring out the oldest album. Do you ever want more control over that? And if you do you put that into the API, or are you doing some fine tuning somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think it's both places, right? One of the times where I find that it is necessary to go and create a web service on top of perhaps an existing service is to do just that, to do some fine tuning and to kind of take in what Copilot Studio is generating as the inputs and then apply some additional logic and then go and call that other service downstream, or maybe to apply some additional security. But you do have the ability to change the output, right? So you can use something called adaptive cards to change the output. And for example, if I go into the Copilot inside my portal here, and I say I'm looking for a house by the beach with a pool, right? So it's now going to use Copilot Studio's natural language reasoning and the generative AI to convert that into a Dataverse query. And so what you can see here is you can see that it's displaying here with a couple of images and a little button here, like kind of allows me to kind of go in there and have a hyperlink directly into there and view it. So that is actually an adaptive card, right? So I've got very, very specific logical control over how that data is rendered. But if you want to have it like more like based on the inputs, maybe there's sort of like kind of certain values that you want to restrict, you can do some of that through the prompting. So when you give it a description of the connector, you can actually put in prompts. So you could say, okay, we'll default it to this particular value, or only let it have these particular values in this comment separated list, all those kind of things. Or you could pre-process it using additional, you can use prompts that actually will then process that data. And this is what I did with this, is actually I took the question from the user, and I have a prompt that says, convert that into JSON, right? Take the query and then extract these different things. And so, I mean, I can actually even show it to you. If I go into this topic here and I go into the listing search here and I open up a here. So this prompt here is, if I look at the prompt, what this is doing is it's saying, it's giving me the ability to kind of add some logic and fine tuning, but still using generative AI. So I'm not like having to go back into that sort of like if then statement kind of thing. So here it's saying you're a real estate agent. Your task is to understand queries about properties. And here's the giving information, you know, these are the things I can search on. And I'm saying output the extracted information in the following JSON structure. So I'm giving it the structure that I want to create. And that's so important when you're doing this kind of stuff. And I'm even giving it examples, right? Here's the query. This is what I want the JSON to be, right? And so it will do that inside that. And then I can extract that JSON and then I convert that into a Dataverse query. Does that help?
Yes, I had one follow-up question, but I want to be respectful to Michael and anyone else who has a question. So we can come back to me, or however you want to do it, Victor.
Sure. If you want to reach out to me, all my contact details there are on the screen.
No, I was gonna say, Sean, go for it. We still have a little bit of time. Actually, 4 minutes past time, maybe 1 more minute for us to conclude it. So go for it.
Oh, I was wondering when I might have missed it. In the Contoso demo you just gave, is that person authenticated to use that chatbot, or is it just open to anyone's on the page?
Sorry, that was breaking up a little bit. Could you just repeat that?
Yeah. So when an end user is in Contoso and I saw that they can be logged in via Power Pages, can they be authenticated when they use their chatbot? Like, show me my previous inquiries. And then can that chatbot be used by authenticated and non-authenticated people? And then part 2 question is can you make it authenticate them in the moment, like if they just arrived on the page or something?
Right. Yes. So it really rather depends on your authentication mechanism, right? Because if you're using Entra ID to authenticate, then that's going to be very, very different to if you're using kind of Open ID Connect, kind of, you know, like I don't know, LinkedIn or Microsoft account or something like that. So if you wanted to provide that, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to provide some kind of mechanism inside your chatbot to do that. But there are mechanisms that are kind of beyond scope to, you know, take me a very long time to describe it. But yes, in short, there are ways of achieving that kind of contextual information. But you do have to be very, very careful with these public facing bots, right? You know, because obviously you want to make sure that if you are exposing any data that is going to be sensitive, it's not public domain, you're accessing individual records. It's really, really hyper important that you focus on that. Now, GitHub Copilot can help you with that. It can give you lots of suggestions.
Thank you.
Awesome. Let's go with Michael's question. Michael, if you're still here with us, maybe unmute yourself and present your question, please.
Great. Thanks. And thanks for this great presentation, Scott. Just earlier in the presentation, you were demoing ERD diagram. You were pushing it out or copying it out into Mermaid, but you mentioned verbally just that there's a way to automate from the ERD diagram to update, say, a dev Dataverse really quickly. What is that method? What do I need to search for to find that answer?
Right. Yeah. Yes. So, okay. So I wanted to show you. There we go. You know why? I hadn't actually searched. I hadn't saved the file. That's why the confetti wasn't working. So there we go. I feel better
Saving
now.
it to the very end. That was
Yeah,
the appropriate
absolutely.
time.
Yeah, the confetti, the big build up, right? Yeah. So yeah, really, it's kind of what I alluded to about following on from what Victor was showing, right? So if I go into my my tables here, and I say, right, okay, you know, I want to go and create some new tables. If I go back and I say tables, and I want to say new table here, create new tables. We've got like a number of different options here. So one of the options obviously is you can go manually do this stuff, or you can import the CSV, you know, or SharePoint, but also you can start from Copilot. And so what this allows you to do here is to describe what you want to do. But now the thing is that it's like a zero shot thing, right? You know, so because you just kind of giving a single prompt and you're hoping for the best. But now, so I could say, right, okay, create me something to manage sessions and speakers and all those kind of things. But quite often, you know, it might get it okay. But actually, what I found is just to kind of use GitHub Copilot, actually. So if I come over here and go to my chat like this, I'll just go start a new chat. And I can just say, I can put in a prompt here to say, you are a prompt engineer using AI to design a database, manage an event, speakers, the session names, date, times, all that. So I'm giving it some information. I'm also saying, create a set of prompts in the format create a for each table and relationship, right? And I'm saying, include the certificate columns, don't include the primary key, foreign key, include if it's a one to many, a many to one, and use display names rather than schema names, right? So I'm kind of giving it a whole load of context. Now, you go to town on that, you could create all sorts of stuff. And what this does is that actually gives us a set of prompts. I'm actually using GitHub Copilot to kind of give me these prompts. And what that means is that I can go now back into here, and I could just start the first prompt, right? Which is say, create a table for event name, data, and it just gives me that starter for 10. But if you remember in the data workspace, we've got Copilot in data workspace. It's on the right-hand side here. So if I go back in there and copy the next thing, and of course, I can have a conversation with this. I could just say, well, you know what? You kind of got it a little bit wrong here because actually, because sessions can be delivered by multiple speakers, right? So it's going to go, right, okay. So if I say here, so it's going to say, okay, it's lost the context about that. But what it will do is it will actually give me a revised set of instructions. So I'm actually so rather than actually documenting it, I'm actually using it to do all the grunt work of designing, right? Okay, right. So I don't know why it's not giving me, but if I paste that next one back into my data workspace down the bottom here, I'll say create a table for speakers, like this. And so it's going to go off and create a table for speakers. And then I can then say, right, create relationships between speakers and sessions. So I'll create the sessions as well. And, you know, you can just keep on pasting them in and it will work on it and add it in. And that way, that gives you so much more control over what you're doing. So you're using AI, you're using Copilot, but you're doing it in a much, much more kind of iterative, more, if you like, supervised way, rather than perhaps the traditional, which is just like you do it and then you have a conversation to ask changes, right? Because you're using GitHub Copilot to get that set of prompts correct in the first place, and then you're using Copilot inside Power Platform to actually do the generation and the creation of your tables. So that's what I was alluding to.
Thanks very much. That's clear. Great.
This is amazing. I would compare this, Scott, to maybe the early days of ASP.NET MVC, when Microsoft was promoting one size fits all for code generation based on data structure. And the offer was, give us your database and we'll create a whole web app for you right off the bat. And a lot of times it would create a lot of useful code, but at the same time, the details were still left for us to do or to correct from what Visual Studio would provide for us. So this one size fits all Copilot, meaning give me a 2-line prompt to create a whole application, in my opinion, again, is I don't think it's the best scenario, best way to use AI. So I concur with you. It's probably best to start with central node of your solution. In this case, this one is starting table, and then start to refine your model as you go with additional prompts. So I agree. I think we have one more question. Sorry. One more question from Mark. Mark, you feel free to unmute yourself and pose your question, comment.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. Very impressive. I was wondering if the fact that for building your workspace, at the beginning, I saw you had everything like in your Visual Studio. I don't know if you opened it as a folder, but did that lead you to developing everything now in Visual Studio Code, or do you still find yourself going to Visual Studio 2022 for plugin development? Just because I'm wondering if everything, if the context is important, maybe it has to be all the time in Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Well done. Yeah, absolutely great for spotting that. And it's somewhat of an awkward reality, right? That you do have to swap over to Visual Studio to handle some of the kind of, like you alluded to, the plugin generate code, because plugin code obviously is going to need to use the .NET Framework 4.6.2, and it's kind of obviously not something that VS Code is very good at doing. But also Visual Studio is very good at doing other things like the dev tunneling, running stuff, C#, web services, a lot of the templating, a lot of the refactoring stuff. So Visual Studio does have an awful lot of good stuff in there for certain type of development. So I find myself using both. But I have to say that having a workspace in VS Code such that I can use Copilot alongside my workspace, where it will give me all of those suggestions and then bring in the contextual stuff of seeing my C# alongside my TypeScript, that is incredibly powerful. So I kind of pivot around VS Code, and then it's like, okay, right now I've got to the point where I really need to go double down and do the C# plugin development, or have it running inside Visual Studio so I can have dev tunnel breakpoints. Now I'm just going to swap over. So it's kind of like a drill down exercise and to use Visual Studio. But I pivot all around VS Code more and more these days.
Thank you.
Awesome. Let me see if I missed any questions from the chat. No, I think we're good. Scott, once again, thank you so much for your time today, and to the participants as well. Thank you for your questions and comments. This is why I love the format that we deliver these lessons in for Zero to Hero. We really have an open mic session. People contribute, and that's the way we want to do things. This lesson is going to be available on the YouTube channel later tonight, so feel free to watch and share with your friends whatever information that you found here that's useful for you. You will welcome to reuse, as long as in this case you can give credit to Scott, but it's free information, it's free for the sharing, and that's how we grow community. We have one more lesson in the mentorship. It's our final lesson next week. We are bringing Mark Smith, and what he's going to present on is essentially, what do we do from here? We looked at AI, the fundamentals of AI with April, and we dove into copilots within Power Platform, within M365, Power Platform, so on and so forth. But for many of the folks who participated so far, this is all brand new. So the idea of next week's lesson is, what do we do from here? What programs can we take part of? What certifications should we pursue to ensure that we stay on top of the game with this new tech revolution? All right. So again, thank you for being here. Sorry for being a little bit over time, but when content's good, that's what it happens. We take the time to really talk about it. Scott, my friend, hope to see you soon. If not, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, enjoy your time off, And for everybody else here, enjoy your holidays. If I don't see you next week, of course, take care, friends. All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.